the classic book All Quiet on the Western Front follows the experience of a 19-year-old German soldier in World War I named Paul. Now, at one point, this frightened young soldier is hiding in a crater made from an explosion. Now, when an enemy jumps into the same hole to hide, Paul instinctively pulls out his dagger and stabs him. That soldier dies shortly after that. Paul, deeply troubled, looks into the man's pocket and discovers that the man's name was Gerald Duval, that he was a printer, that he was obviously poor. And this man, who had been an abstraction to him, an enemy soldier, suddenly becomes all too real. Moved, he speaks to the dead man. Now, for the first time, I see you are a man like me. He finds a picture of a woman and a child. And he says then, I see your wife and your face and our fellowship. Forgive me, comrade. We always see it too late. Why do they never tell us that you are poor like us, that your mothers are just as anxious as ours, and that we have the same fear of death and the same agony? Forgive me. We always see it too late. Gerald was no different than Paul, really, but he had been taught, as had been Paul, to see each other not as persons, but merely as enemies. And he says he saw it too late. My friends, we way too often also see it too late. The rich man in today's gospel who did not notice Lazarus laying at his doorstep, starving, is condemned precisely because he saw it too late. He didn't kick Lazarus, he didn't spit on him anyway. Jesus tells this story that he was condemned merely because he never saw him. He had to step over him, of course, but he never really saw him. While he feasted splendidly, the scriptures say, and Lazarus was begging even for a crumb, to the rich man, he was just, a statistic, one of those people you read about out there. And he is condemned for seeing it too late. And I worry about us. It is so easy for us to be so removed from the suffering of so many that we don't see them until it's too late, right? Or that they become merely statistics. Jesus tells us this story today because he worries about what dies inside of ourselves when we see it too late. There's a chilling story about Heinrich Himmler, one of the main Nazi leaders of the Holocaust. He had a group of his generals together, each who were in charge of the various concentration camps, which killed millions upon millions of Jews, gays, and blacks, each of whom were real human beings with families. And as he gathered all those leaders of concentration camps together, he said, you know what makes us so great? We can do this thing we have to do and then go home and be good and decent husbands and fathers. We just killed millions, yes, millions of wives and parents and children and siblings, and we're good and decent, we think. What has to die inside of ourselves so that we can be so removed from the pain of others? Sadly, I believe these days in our economics, our politics, and our religion, we too often forget that we are in it together, that we are brothers and sisters called to work together for a world more filled with justice for each person and love for everyone. As I have said before, reasonable people can disagree about the best way to get to a world where every person is cared for. But as followers of Christ, we cannot not care. We have to work to see each other before it's too late. Can we learn to see more than a fetus in the womb, but actually a child of God? When we read about people on death row, about immigrants, about people starving in Gaza, being bombed in Ukraine, fleeing for their lives in the Sudan or in Haiti, can we remember that if we checked their wallets, we would see pictures of their kids, their mothers, their siblings, their grandkids? How do we learn to see it before it's too late? There are two things that help us. One is thinking, one is acting. For many of us, and for all of us, we need a bit of both. It will be initiated by how we think. For others, by how we act. Our thinking needs to be is this. You've probably, if you've been here before, heard me say to our children that God put some of God inside of every girl and boy. That thinking is important. God did some of God inside of every person. And the acting, as I was, the way to behave, as I was coached in graduate school, is to spend time, physical time with those the world so easily discards and sees as lowly. Somehow, those two things change us. And I'll just give you two examples from my own personal life of how my own thinking was expanded. In my college days, a group of us seminarians would spend a week during the summer, some 2 weeks, caring for young men or men with Down syndrome or other mental challenges. I had this group of 3. Many would say they're low functioning. To this day, I can see their faces, and I have this tender spot in my heart for them. And now, I can't walk past a person who has Down syndrome, for example, without making sure that they know that I saw them, because God helped me to see through those 3 guys. Secondly, another example for me, I remember a time years ago when a man came to the confessional and told me about what he was working on to be a better husband and a better father. And then he said, "Father, I am undocumented immigrant. And please, Father, don't tell anyone." And I would never tell anyone anything I hear in the confessional. He says, because he was in our parish, everybody loved him. He was quiet, hardworking, nice guy. He goes, because I want my kids to be able to stay in our school, and they would take me away, and I would never see them again, and I would never see my wife again, and just started sobbing. And from that moment forward for me, undocumented immigrants were no longer statistics, but people who have kids and spouses. Jesus believes that for the sake of our very souls, it is important that we think rightly and spend time with those the world discards, keeping our minds and hearts open that we might see them, to see that we are each children of God and that we are all in this together. May God help us see that before it's too late.